In opening our presentation this afternoon, we do acknowledge that wherever we are on the sovereign lands of the First Nations people, and we pay our respects to the custodianship over the millennia and the inherent leadership of the past, the present, and those who are emerging. Colleagues, if you've participated in one of these presentations before, you would know that they are quite structured, and on the basis of some of the questions that have been asked prior to the presentation, I propose to go through a series of common questions and finally get to the point where do we go to now. So the most common question people are asking out there is, what have the employers done? Well, pretty clearly, they have decided to put essentially the same document to a second ballot. Now, it's not entirely the same, because in their haste in the first iteration, there were things which I think they were frankly embarrassed about taking out of the document, and those things that they were embarrassed about have been reinserted. Now, yesterday we forwarded to you a summary sheet which has on it the things which have changed and the things which have not changed. I would encourage you to have a look at that sheet, and if there are any questions about that, you've obviously got contact details and you can forward those to us directly, or you can speak to your organiser. In essence, what they have reinserted are matters which are important to individuals, and in the absence of them would be open to ambiguity in the document. So, for instance, they've made it clear that all school officers and services staff are now eligible for induction. They've indicated that the allowances for first aid allowance are now applicable to any employee in the school officer and services staff area. They've reinstated the provision where a school officer with high needs assistance provision to students, if they're absent for more than 5 hours, they are replaced as a matter of course. They've also tidied up some of the language around the matters to deal with people moving from part-time to full-time and vice versa, and the status of their entitlements. They've also, by their amendment, made it clear that the senior leader provisions in the agreement apply in primary schools as well as middle and secondary schools. So these are quite cosmetic matters, really, at the edge of it. The things which have not changed, there is no substantive change to any meaningful intervention for workload work intensification. There's no attempt to engage with regard to a wage scale reflecting the inherent work value of the school officer new classification. And they have persisted with their clause to allow the employer to question people with regard to patterns of the use of sick leave. They have also ensured in their language, as they would see it, that people who resign before the agreement is approved, plus the 7 days which follow under the Act, that those people would not be entitled to back pay. They've also ensured that they have left in that for guidance counsellors who are part-time, that those people may be recalled during vacation periods to provide assistance at the school level. That hasn't been there before. They've also persisted with their reference to workplace stress and to harassment, that their reliance is entirely on the NES, which, as we've explained before, our current agreement went beyond the NES requirements. The reliance on the NES requirements essentially mean that you've got to go to tribunals to get resolution, rather than under the existing provisions that you can deal with these things at the school level more appropriately. So it is essentially the same document that they put out the first time. In terms of the next question most commonly asked is, can they do this? Well, sadly, yes. Under the Act, it is the employer who has the authority to put a document to ballot. They're the ones at the end of the day the Act recognises which would need to fund and support the conditions in a collective agreement. So it is they who put out an agreement. And they are entirely at their right to actually put an agreement out. They've done it the first one, they've clearly done it the second one. The next question people ask is, well, is that right? Can they actually do it that way? Well, properly, if you get a negative vote, you actually go and listen to people and actually ask them what was the problem, and you would try to address that problem. Now, when they finally met with us last week, the meeting started at 9:34 and was over by 9:41, because all they wanted to tell us was that they were going to go to ballot. That's essentially the purpose of the meeting. And if you have a look at your emails that arrived last Thursday announcing this further ballot, you will know that, well, perhaps the more expeditious principals and the more expeditious school authorities got it out within 10 minutes of that meeting concluding. So this was very much a set of arrangements, and they were putting this ballot out. Now, members have been quite rightly outraged by this. Properly, as I said a moment ago, they should have listened to you. And we were ready in that discussion last Thursday to talk about matters which might be explored to bring resolution to a document which people could be able to support. But that wasn't the purpose of the meeting from their point of view. It was essentially a courtesy to say, we're putting it out. Now, in terms of it being out there, the employers are clearly going for broke on this. They have quite clearly instructed principals and senior administration to ensure that there are closed meetings, to have materials out, to have documentation provided, to leave an open door policy in terms of if you have any questions, and even to the extent where in at least one authority, principals have been told to provide part of a staff meeting in the next week for people to actually vote during the course of the staff meeting. Return to those sorts of things in a moment. Now, people ask the question, well, we voted no, they didn't listen to that. Will they vote? If we vote no this time, what happens then? Well, if there is a no vote in this second ballot, then clearly we will look to other provisions of the Act to seek the assistance, independent assistance, to get a support in the process of trying to resolve a document that you out there might say, well, this is now acceptable. And so it'd be brilliant, but acceptable. Now, there is no guarantee of that. And if it is a no vote, then clearly we will look to the capacities which still are there with the protected action schools to exercise protected action. And clearly it would be within the purvey of schools that are currently not protected action schools to look to seek a protected action ballot to support their action and their concern with this agreement from the employer. Now, I have been asked the question, what about protected action now? Well, given the tight timeframes, last Thursday, week's notice period, ballot shortly thereafter and only open for a week, with the notice periods that we would have to provide, with the contingencies of what's going on in schools at the moment, particularly in senior secondary school level, the judgment was that it would be quite difficult for us to collectively organise protected action. Rather, the course of action which we have set out to do is to support you, if you want to vote no, to support you in your no vote. However, if there is a no outcome, then clearly we look to all of the capacities which remain under the Act and with our various groups of chapters and members within the diocesan grouping, all the options that are open for us to explore. So the complementary question then is, well, what if they do get it across the line and it's a yes vote? Well, my personal view is if there is a yes vote, I hope it is a very, very narrow one. And if you voted no last time because you were concerned, I would encourage you to vote no this time because employers have done nothing to assuage, to deal with the concerns that you have. But if it is a yes vote, then clearly the employer has right under the Act to seek the approval of the Fair Work Commission to approve the agreement, and if approved, 7 days later, it becomes legally enforceable. Now, you can appreciate for obvious reasons that I'm not going to share with you this afternoon the contingency plans that we have of where we go to if it is a yes vote and there is an agreement approved. But what I can assure you is that there are clearly strategies which we well understand, which would support your fundamental concerns that you have and the essential things which are missing from this document if it were to be endorsed and approved by the Fair Work Commission. Now, I can say a little more than that, but for those of you who know me, I am clearly saying there is a plan. And if it is a yes vote and it is approved by the Commission, then clearly we will embark upon the next steps to support you in schools. Now, I alluded earlier to the employers going for broke in terms of getting a vote up. And they are, I think, counselling themselves that they didn't try hard enough to actually get a vote out and get people to vote in sufficient numbers. They have done the numbers and they've identified if only so many more people had voted yes, then they would have got it across the line. So the lesson that they've taken out of it is not that they should have listened to employees about their concerns. The lesson that they've taken out of it is that we need to get more people to vote, because if we got more people to vote, more people are likely to say yes and we'll get it across the line. So they will go full bore in terms of trying to get people to vote. So you can anticipate the captive meetings, you can anticipate the material being distributed, you can anticipate presentations from principals outlining what the employer would argue is the benefits. And I draw that distinction. The principal is the agent of the employer, and if they are given a lawful direction to make this presentation, then they lawfully should do so. If they choose to do it in a particular way, well, that's their choice, but the fundamental instruction is there. So if these sorts of things occur, my strong advice to you is to say, as a chapter, all right, well, let's have some equal time on this. That's a view that's being put, and we want to put our view too. So if there is a captive audience, a captive staff meeting for these purposes, as a chapter, be disciplined and say, well, that's fine. Now we've got some things to say to the meeting as well. If there are materials which are being distributed, we'll make sure our materials are prominent on union notice boards. There is nothing preventing you, particularly in the protected action schools, for actually taking the poster which we distributed, taking the summary sheet and having the conversation with people who are not members of our union and why you are voting no, and that you would encourage them for similar reasons to vote no. Central point that I would make is that you don't have to sit quietly and acquiesce to what will be the aggressiveness in the coming week to you need to vote yes. As a chapter, if you are concerned, I would encourage you to assert that you want a say too, to talk to your colleagues about this matter. That is just fundamental in terms of the complex of a school and fundamental in the sort of society in which we live. Now, if you encounter issues with that, obviously you've got the capacity to talk to your organiser, and I'd again encourage you to do that if you have inquiry or question. But the key point is that you should not just say, well, the employer is doing this, that it should be challenged, it should be called out, and within bounds of reasonableness, that you actually have the opportunity of a say as well. Now, the final comment that I would make to you, and I have made this comment in a number of forums and in briefings to you, the employer's strategy from day one in this renegotiation of the agreement has been to use fundamentally a strategy of fear, threat and intimidation. It has not been a strategy of listening to employees, because if they had listened to employees, they would not have put the document that they put the first time. They would not, because that document did not reflect your views and your concerns, particularly with regard to workload, work intensification, and particularly with regard to wage justice for school officers. But they didn't listen. Rather, their strategy from day one has been to threaten and to intimidate. And you can go through the catalogue of threats from day one with regard to this has to be sorted by the 30th of June or there's no increased salary from the 1st of July. They threatened people going into the protected action ballots. They threatened people clearly and exercised it in some dioceses where if you were to actually take those limited protected actions, like doing such outrageous things as taking an unpaid lunch break and not talking to students, that you would lose a day's pay. So it's been replete with threat and intimidation. And you can expect in this next 10 days that there will be more of that and more of that. Now, we're educators. We know what you do when you get students in class who decide that they'll threaten and try and intimidate. You stand up to it, and you stand up for the principles, and you stand up for the decency of the way that people are treated. And I encourage you, as you exercise your vote, to contemplate the future of schools, the future of Catholic education, and in many ways your vote will exercise leadership which has been, frankly, sadly missing from the negotiations coming from the employer side.